Greetings and salutations from Sandton, Johannesburg, South Africa. It is such a privilege to be invited to really deliver this virtual salutation at this Youthup conference 2023 on Africa Day, quite a prestigious milestone in the year as we together as a collective reevaluate the road to Agenda 2063. On that note, without much further ado, let me pause and give honor where honor is due by first and foremost extending much gratitude for this platform that has been availed by none other than the visionary leader, my brother and esteemed Pan-Africanist leader, Dr. Faith Nowobia. I must really thank him for continuing to be the super glue that brings us, myself, yourself, the audiences, and my fellow panelists and thought leaders to mark this Africa Day. My point of gratitude will be incomplete if I do not also extend gratitude to you, our fellow leaders and shakers of our time, our team at Youthup Global, and not forgetting our team at the sister company, Youthup. Indeed, Africa Day is a big deal, and we appreciate your collective efforts in availing this platform to really do our bit for the Africa we want. On that note, let me also thank my fellow panelists that are present. You've heard from some of them by now, and you are about to hear from others, including the meeting conveners, the facilitators, the conversation strategists, all leaders that are helping to lead at the front lines. My fellow speakers and thought leaders, I salute you and thank you for taking time out of your diary to mark this prestigious event. Indeed, as the wise man once said, Africa rises when its leaders rise. On that note, when it comes to the road to Agenda 2063, I would like to remind you that that is not an eternity away. It is all too tempting as an illusion to imagine 2063 as perhaps it's a number too big to conceptualize, and it's a number that is for those other people because it's miles away. It is not, my fellow African and our global audiences. 2063, the 1st of Jan, is only 2066 Saturdays to the dot as we are convening this discussion. So there are 3 big ticket items that I would like to touch on at this point in anticipation of that milestone. First one, our population index as Africa has got something to tell us as we mark this day. Number 2, we will be the youngest continent on the planet. And number 3, there is a grocery bill, a food grocery bill that I will delve into that is marked with $55 billion. When it comes to the population index outlay, or what the population would or could look like by 2063, we have to bear in mind that we would have evolved by then into a continent that is home not to 1.2 billion citizens as we are now, but we will by then would have passed over the 2.5 billion Africans mark. And indeed, we will account for almost 30%, if not more. 30% of the world's population will be right here in my backyard and your backyard. And remember when I mentioned the youngest? Yes, That is a big ticket item for us to be aware of. We will officially be the youngest continent, and of course, we will be the most employment ready continent of all the others. So when it comes to skill sets, when it comes to human capital, especially in keeping with what Youthup stands for, we will be a go-to continent. Without much further ado, maybe you're wondering about that grocery bill that I touched on. Good people, as it stands now, to successfully feed 1.2 billion of us Africans, we are seeing a grocery import bill of nothing less than 55 billion US dollars. That's how much we are bringing into African shores annually. And that number is bound to more than double not far from now, especially between 2025 and 2030. What does that look like by the time we are passing over the 2063 mark? Well, our grocery bill would be comfortably, if we don't do anything about our arable land, our grocery bill would have safely passed a 300 billion US dollar mark. And if you're to factor inflation, if you're to run some econometrics model, you might find that that's way too modest of a projection. So what does that actually look like? Our arable land is actually more than 65% of the world. I know one needs to be practical about these things. Let me put it this way. If the world was home to about 10 hectares of arable land, just to simplify it just a bit, do pardon me, then we will be seeing a reality where 6.5 of those hectares of arable land are actually sitting right here in our backyard in Africa. So why would we allow our food grocery bill to be swelling like that when we have capable skill set? It's Youthup Global, right? When we have capable skill sets of young people. When we are heading, even now, we are ranking in that youngest continent category. So I believe that if we are to pave way, or if we are to navigate that trajectory towards Agenda 2063, we would have to be very careful that most of our food basket will need to come from our backyard. For sustainability purposes, we love our neighbors, but I'm sure our neighbors on the east and on the west of the continent do desire for us to be food secure and not be a burden to our neighbors. I know there are profits to be considered by our beloved neighbors, but honestly, sustainability is going to be key for us if we are going to realize the Africa we want. On that note, there's a question for you and I to consider. What can we do today to prevent three things? A job crisis, a non-governable or non-manageable food import bill, or a grocery bill that is running like a runaway train. And of course, last but not least, what are we to do to successfully tackle the poverty levels that have come to mark Africa's reality? Those are the three things: jobs, food import bill, and poverty. Let's start with jobs. We do not seek to see a future where Africa, somewhat in the future, moves from being plundered for mineral resources to a future whereby we are plundered for our human capital resource. We do not, if I was to put it very differently, but with as much diplomacy as I can master, we do not want to see an Africa where we become the world's go to labor camp for cheap labor. That's not the Africa we want. So therefore, what kind of skills are we prioritizing today? What kind of skills are we really gearing for at an individual level, at a country level, and at a regional level? We need to ensure that we steer clear of the type of skills that will put us at the bottom of the pyramid when it comes to decision-making capacities, when it comes to driving civilization forward, and when it comes to shaping and producing the Africa we want. The Africa we want is unlikely to be produced in Europe. The Africa we want is unlikely to be produced in Asia. While those countries, while those economies might pitch in to really help to shape that Africa we want, but ultimately, the weight of responsibility sits with me and with you. So you and I will have to really think differently when it comes to the type of jobs we want to be ready for as Africa. And when it comes to the food import bill, let us really avoid that grocery bill or that food import bill passing the $1 trillion mark. But if nothing is done, I think that's where we are going. We are going to see the arrival of the Africa we don't want. You know, one of my mentors once said that great intentions will never see you realizing or arriving at the destination you intend to arrive at. Intentions are great, but we need careful planning. We need a value core that comes around that planning. We need visionary leadership. We need momentum towards the direction we want. We do not want much of wishful thinking and rhetoric and some narratives that have marked our past, where we find ourselves navigating the Africa we don't want. Take me for an example. I grew up as a sustenance farmer, living off the ground. Only 5% or so of the food that ended up at our dinner table came from the shops down the road or far off. 95% of what we ate, whether you're speaking crops or livestock, we prepared it ourselves. We planted it. We were doing the breeding. We were doing the preparation. I'm not quite saying that that strategy from my village days might sustain the cities, but I'm saying let's at least have parameters where at scale, at commercial scalable levels, we are able to really secure the food we want and the Africa we need. On a poverty level, we ought to avoid moving in a direction, whether politically, commercially, or individually. We have to avoid moving in a direction that will materialize food insecurity or even greater poverty levels. I mean, currently, tonight, on the 25th of May, 2023, tonight, you and I will go to bed tonight. Hopefully, we have had something to eat. But the reality is, according to the United Nations numbers, tonight, at least 811 million citizens of the world, not just Africa, citizens of the world, 811 million of them will go to bed hungry. So what does that number look like by 2063? How many people are going hungry to bed? Or rather, how many people will go to bed having eaten? How many of those are in Africa? Are we seeing an unfolding crisis? Or we are seeing solutions amongst us in this room? Avoid looking at the next person. Avoid looking far off to the east or to the west. The Africa we want will be led by us from the front line. You do your bit, I do my bit. I believe that's the spirit of Africa Day. Not looking far off, but looking within the parameters of what can we do with what we have, with where we are at. And on that note, when it comes to food security, there are 3 key things that are worth expanding upon. Food security has 3 pillars that we ought to unpack. 1, accessibility. 2, affordability. And last but not least, sustainability. Did you know now, if I was to grab my device here, I could order from this device. There's a number of e-commerce apps that are on this device, including our own eFarmer. On this device, there are a number of e-commerce platforms. I could, within 15 minutes of placing an order now, for my office or for my home, I could have ingredients, raw ingredients that will help me to make a creamy pasta, which is an Italian dish. God bless the Italians. However, that 15 minutes may not be so if from South Africa, I want to order myself raw ingredients to make egusi, or to make jollof rice, or to make okra. I might need a treasure map for that one. I might need to send men from the village to go hunting across the parameters of South Africa to really find those egusi ingredients. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a bit. There are some places where I could drive deep into the depths of certain parts of Johannesburg, where I might find a bit here and a bit there. But why should it be that hard when it comes to ordering African ingredients in Africa, whereas ingredients of an Italian kind are easily available? We love our Italians. We love our Italian food. But remember what I said, a food secure future for Africa will need to see us not only growing the ingredients we want, but ensuring that accessibility for those ingredients is brought within reach for the consumers who desire those food items. And such is what drove us to embark on establishing the eFarmer app, which has been launched and is gathering momentum, where we just wanted to close the gap between the farmer and the consumer. On that note, let me look at the affordability item. Can we make it easier for consumers to buy from producers? Whether the producers are fashion designers, whether they are farmers, or whoever they are, we need more of you, dear audiences, under the sound of my voice, to really venture out there to solve this type of industrial challenges. Because those industrialists that Africa has been waiting for, I'm hoping they will not come from Europe. Even though Europe has gifted us with so many a times a number of innovations, or the US, the West, or Asia itself. But can we start seeing innovations come from within Africa? Think about it. There's a certain app in Asia that is gaining momentum, is today valued at more than 100 billion US dollars. That same application has disrupted and democratized the fashion world. Africans are now able, when they are on that application, I wish I owned it, but watch the space. Africans are able to buy clothing items for 4 times cheaper than at their local retail stores. Because those clothing items move directly from the factory all the way to the African home, all the way from Asia right into your home, without much middleman effect in between. Middlemen, we love them, just like how we love our neighbors far in the West and in Asia. But we cannot love middlemen to a point where farmers, in terms of agriculture, remain part of the food insecure who go hungry at night. Imagine a hungry farmer, a hungry African farmer who's languishing in poverty, who's barely eking out a living. That's not the Africa we want. So let's endeavor to simplify and bring affordability to African consumers so that a food secure future is a reality for both farmers, consumers, and other processors in between across the agricultural value chain. That's the Africa we want. Last but not least, another big ticket item to be mindful of is sustainability. If Africa is home, which is true, if Africa is home to 65% of global arable land, then why do we have undercapacitated farmers? Then why do we have agriculture still looking undesirable to our youngest generation? Why is it that we are not making agriculture to look as attractive, as agile, and as tech ready for the high yields and for the profitable farming operations that we need on this continent? Because Africa Day is not complete when farmers cannot put their tools down to come and celebrate with us, because they too are running profitable operations. They too are food secure. So I dream of a future where Africa Day, and by the time we even come closer to 2063, we will see an Africa where per hectare we can see much higher yields per hectare than we currently are seeing, where our post-harvest losses are really, really painting a dismal picture. And also, when it comes to legacy, continuity, and handing over to the next generation, we need a much higher offtake of young people wanting to farm and produce food for Africa, by Africans, for Africans. At the rate we are going, that food import bill, that food grocery bill is not going to go anywhere. It's going to keep swelling if we are not producing the farmers of tomorrow today. Of course, farming doesn't have to be the messy business that it is. Not entirely, if technology can come alongside us to help us with the heavy lifting. And on the item of quality jobs, that's also worth unpacking further. Let me localize this to you, dear audience. Yes, you. Do you currently possess a skill? Or before I even go there, there are three things I'm going to touch on under quality jobs. 1, $10,000 per month jobs. 2, internships done the right way. And 3, building a personal brand that supports your career aspirations. In that order, let me start with $10,000 a month, $10,000 a month jobs. Are you currently in possession of, or are you currently cultivating a skill set or a qualification, readiness, that will enable you to earn minimum $10,000 a month? If that is not you, then why not? If that's not the case, why not? Think about it. Maybe some of you are passionate about law. Maybe some of you are passionate about engineering. Maybe some of you are even passionate about farming. Whatever the case, would you find a specialty within that specialty and then hammer away at practicing, hammer away at learning, hammer away at refining your skill set until not just locally, but globally, you can be in such demand that you see yourself seeing earnings of minimum $10,000 a month, because we can no longer have an Africa or whereby we have poverty jobs, where people are just barely living hand to mouth, barely making a living. That's not the Africa we want. We need an Africa where there'll be a surplus left after you honor all your bills. There'll be a surplus left after you take care of what's important. I don't know, maybe you're building a compound for your mom, for your dad. Maybe you're building a compound for neighbors that couldn't afford. But having done everything, we can't see an Africa where you and I merely exist to service debts, where you and I merely exist to live paycheck to paycheck. That's not the Africa we want. We need an Africa that is prosperous. We need an Africa where our savings, or rather the wealth we create, can be sent down like a baton to take care of not just our children, but our children's children. That's the Africa we want. What about internships done the right way? Those of you that are studying in any shape or form, whether vocationally or at university or even in school, make sure that you prioritize getting involved in the workplace as soon as you can. Make sure that you fold and really get involved into harnessing or tapping into a real life work experience as early as you can, whether by volunteering or by getting holiday vocational work. Just make sure you get involved, because at our company alone, we receive more than 40 applications for internships from the first world universities, from the first world countries that are seeking to really not just have a workplace exposure, but to have an exposure of what it means to work for an African startup. Very flattering, but I wish the number of internship applications that we get from our fellow Africans, I wish those can also increase. I wish that those future graduates and the current graduates can be futuristic, those that are in Africa, because the ones we see from first world countries that actually go through our hands, they end up creating their own personal brands. They end up creating, those that are in the coding space, they end up creating their own apps. By the time they apply for jobs beyond internships, they're able to demonstrate a portfolio of evidence that is really littered with excellence and cutting-edge display of what they were capable of doing in an internship capacity. So they're not a blank page by the time they enter the workplace. So are you on the lookout for internship opportunities that really seek to harness and refine and challenge you beyond your comfort zone, so that by the time you arrive in the workplace, you are really sharpened, or you have sharpened your axe? Last but not least, on this quality jobs aspect, make sure that as much as you are attending to the hard skills of your workplace readiness, that your soft skills do not suffer. Among those soft skills entail your ensuring that you build a personal brand that will stand shoulder to shoulder with the rest. And Dr. Faith, in this regard, is among the shining examples of what it means to daily labor away in ensuring that your personal brand puts your name on the charts of the go-to people. Even myself, it's a culture between myself and my co-founder. As much as we are working daily, tirelessly on the hard skills side of running a startup, creating not just a profitable entity, but a healthy balance sheet, we cannot afford to neglect our brand. I'm not at a level yet where my former neighbor, Mr. Elon Musk, who lived just in my proximity before heading out to Canada and America. I'm not at a level where my own personal brand is at his personal brand level, but I take notes now and then when I see just how vocal, how intentional, and just how contagious his personal brand is. Who knows? Maybe one day, the Africa I want will see me lead at those levels of influence, lead at a personal brand that can punch beyond my weight. What about you? Are you prioritizing your personal brand? The Africa we want is not complete if we are not going to tell our own stories. We had a scenario not long ago. We are currently running a number of employment campaigns within the company. One of the nearly shortlisted candidates, he had a fierce resume. He was super skilled and experienced. But when the team began delving on, when the team began focusing on other aspects of his personal brand, he was left wanting. He had such a scary online presence that it really gave some of my team members goosebumps. The kind of personal brand that we could safely say was an enemy of progress. So don't be that person. Make sure that your brand speaks on your behalf when you are not in the room. Make sure that you also prioritize what we call a T-shaped learning. A T-shaped learning strategy would make sure that you deepen your knowledge insights on this part of the T that is vertical, but on the horizontal part, you also learn the adjacent expertise, the adjacent insights, that complement the brand you want if we are to collectively materialize or realize the Africa we want. On a concluding note, for the benefit of time, if you think the Africa we want is the responsibility of your government or my government to realize it, then my fellow African, you will be mistaken. And if you believe that Agenda 2063 ought to be realized only at a political level or at a government level, and you and I must be excused from pitching in with our expertise, with our energies, with our hard work, with our contributions to produce that Agenda 2063 and Africa we want, then you and I will be mistaken. The sad reality is that Africa is home to a fast-aging population of particularly political leaders. I say this from a good place in my heart. Our political leaders, we love them, we respect them, but sadly, a majority of them will be dead and they'll be long gone by the time we arrive at 2063, which is 2066 Saturdays away. It may seem quite near, but when you look at the average age of an African head of state, most of them will be long gone. God bless them. Most of them will be departed. So it will be left with you and I as to whether the Africa we want, we will be producing it for ourselves as the youth of today and the responsible citizens of tomorrow. Our heads of states, most of them, they will not be around. They will not be here to explain to your kids, my kids, why they don't have school shoes. They won't be here to explain why our kids are hungry. So if we are to prevent that hunger, let's do it now, knowing that we are the ones that will be around, God willing. I hope we won't have to explain to our children or grandchildren why they don't have this or they don't have that. I hope that instead we will be hearing from our grandchildren how proud they are of me, of you, that we took time not just to celebrate Africa Day, but to work tirelessly on the other side of this celebration to produce the future we want, the lives we want, and the Africa we want. Because the reality is the Africa we want will be realized when you and I make decisions today that will future-proof our families and the next generations. Hear me carefully. With or without the government, we still have families to feed. Listen to me carefully. Maybe, just maybe, we will be sending foreign aid to Europe by then. Okay. Maybe we won't send foreign aid to Europe. Maybe Europe won't be poor, but who is to say they won't be? I personally don't wish that Europe or China or America is poor. I personally wish that we will all, as the 7 continents, lift as we rise. I pray for a future where the world we want and the Africa we want can coexist peacefully. Our win doesn't have to be their loss. Their gain doesn't have to be our loss. We have to quit this poverty mindset of thinking that we are competing for a pie that is running out. No. One of my mentors, whom I really respect, said wealth is not a pie, but it's a river. So let's bring our containers to fetch abundance from that river to really venture on our journey to produce the Africa we want. It can't be produced with a scarcity mindset. It can't be produced with the lizard brain. It can't be produced with a toxic competition or talking down on others so that we can rise. No, don't mind them. Whatever they're doing, let's produce the Africa we want together. Final parting note, let me give honor where it's due. I want to once again thank you, my brother, Dr. Faith, for convening this visionary event. And I want to also extend my gratitude to every team member on the Youthup Global and Utidia for your tireless efforts to lead and serve from the front lines towards producing the Africa we want. I also want to send my salutations and give due honor to my fellow speakers, fellow panelists, and also panel conveners and facilitators who are collectively doing the heavy lifting to make this event possible and to honor and salute Africa Day, which is for Africans, and for the world to join us in these celebrations. On that note, here's to a blessed Africa. Here's to a real reason to celebrate Africa Day. It's when we can repent of our evil ways and change our minds. And with that mind shift, we can go towards being the producers that will produce the Africa we want, not the consumers that will wait with their folded arms for whatever comes their way. On that note, as they say in Hollywood, Nollywood or Bollywood, it is to be continued. Thank you very much.